Since the publication of the London Plan in 2021, we've been in the process of updating any existing London Plan guidance or producing new, some of which I'm sure you've seen, such as the urban greening factor or air quality positive, air quality neutral guidance. Old SPGs or supplementary planning guidance has been rebranded as LPG or London Plan guidance, but this has no impact on the material weight of the documents. It's simply a rebranding exercise. As part of the wider rollout of LPG, we have been looking at what was previously our Homes for Londoners Affordable Housing and Viability Supplementary Planning Guidance, seen here, which we produced in 2017. We've been looking at that to bring it up to date with the 2021 London Plan and to change its style into a more streamlined LPG format. This has also allowed us to consolidate practice notes that we'd produced since 2017, such as the threshold approach to affordable housing on public land, so guidance is now in one place. LPG provides guidance to support the implementation of London Plan policies. It is taken into account when planning applications are decided and local plans are being drawn up. LPG is subject to consultation, usually for 12 weeks, after which we review and potentially amend to take into account anything relevant that is raised during consultation. Guidance is accompanied by an EQIA or Equalities Impact Assessment that is also subject to consultation and review and remains a live document throughout the production of the guidance. As an implementation tool for the London Plan, guidance cannot go beyond the existing policies, straying into areas that create new policy, but can explain how policies should be interpreted when submitting or determining applications. For the update, sections that remained relevant in the 2017 SPG were retained and the text was updated to align with the London Plan. Some guidance has fallen away, in most cases because it's now in London Plan as policy. This is one of the things that's helped us to cut the length of the new guidance. Guidance has also been split into two sections, one focusing on affordable housing and one on development viability, although of course they are closely linked. Additions have included sections that reflect the outcome of previous intermediate housing consultations, text to introduce the new Affordable Homes programme and to clarify its relationship with the threshold approach to applications in the planning system, as well as updates around viability appraisal and best practice expectations. Here is just a reminder of all the policies that have affordable housing considerations. This includes your specialist housing policies, such as student or older persons, as well as build to rent. We now have DF1 in play in the London Plan, our planning obligations policy.
The Affordable Housing LPG provides guidance on the implementation of the Mayor's threshold approach to applications. This was introduced in 2017 through the Affordable Housing and Viability Supplementary Planning Guidance, and now the threshold approach also forms part of the London Plan in policies H4 and H5. This enables schemes to follow the fast-track route where they provide 35% or more affordable housing or 50% on public and industrial land. And where that's the case, no viability testing is required and no late or mid-term reviews are required either. For schemes that don't achieve the 35% or 50% on public and industrial land, they must follow the viability tested route and are subject to viability testing, late reviews and mid-term reviews for larger schemes. The intention of the threshold approach was to give greater certainty and ensure that affordable housing requirements were better reflected in land values. The threshold approach uses a sequence of clear incentives and disincentives to increase affordable housing from the low levels that were secured in the previous years, whilst also speeding up the planning process. And London Plan Policy H6 also sets out requirements and definitions for different types of affordable housing, including social rent, London affordable rent, London living rent, and shared ownership to ensure that these are genuinely affordable. Looking back at the proportion of affordable housing secured in strategic schemes that are referred to the Mayor, it's clear that the threshold approach has helped to increase this significantly to 38%, up from 25% in 2016, And the charts here show that when assessed on an average per scheme basis, the proportion of affordable housing has increased to 41% by unit and 45% when measured by habitable room, which takes into account the size of properties. This graph also shows that the proportion of schemes following the fast track route has increased year on year, with 2/3 of eligible schemes following the fast track route in 2022, and last year more than 80% of schemes provided 35% affordable housing, which is a trend that has been achieved over the last couple of years. In addition, the proportion of low-cost rent affordable housing has increased in recent years, and in particular the provision of social rent. All of this indicates that the threshold approach has been working well, and taking into account current market conditions, we do not currently intend to increase the 35% threshold, which could have the effect of more schemes following the viability tested route.
So back to the guidance. Surrounding policy H6, we are confirming that accordance with local plan tenure mix policies allows for the fast track route to be taken, and are also confirming that the Mayor's preference is for social rent delivery, which aligns with the new Affordable Homes Programme, or AHP 2021 to 2026, making clear that London affordable rent is no longer funded by this AHP. We have also taken the opportunity to introduce some guidance that speaks to the Mayor's earlier consultations on intermediate housing. This includes reference to a mayoral priority on providing for key workers, whereby we are suggesting that councils, through their own eligibility criteria, prioritise key workers for the allocation of intermediate homes. We are also considering and asking for views on the appropriateness of allowing an increase to the income cap for intermediate rent. Currently, it's set at a max household income of £60,000, which has been the case since 2017. Any potential rise is to acknowledge that there has been a rise in median household incomes since that time, and also to potentially allow for more households that are in need of intermediate rent, some of which will be key workers, to access it. We are subsuming the existing practice note on first homes, referencing the new shared ownership model which came into play last year, and seeking that intermediate rent is provided where possible in higher value areas where the intermediate sale price exceeds £600,000 at market value. We have also included comment on service charges needing to be affordable, whilst allowing residents of affordable housing to have the same right of access to amenities and facilities as residents of other tenures. In relation to the Mayor's Affordable Homes Programme, or AHP, we've included a section that breaks it down and highlights other mayoral funding programmes. Here, we are just trying to ensure the way the new AHP works, particularly in relation to threshold approach to planning applications, is understood. So in brief, this is that the programme is now focused on negotiated grant rates for social rent, London Living Rent and the new model of shared ownership, that affordable housing delivered via grant is net additional to that which could have been achieved through the planning system, and that additionality and value for money is determined through a separate grant allocation process. Where this then meets the fast track route is that schemes can follow this with grant provided they are delivering either 40% affordable housing or 50% for public and industrial land, or 35% if part of a portfolio agreement with the Mayor. For those schemes not using grant, they will still be able to access the fast track route at 35% affordable. Finally, the AHP applies to RP, borough and developer-led schemes. On build to rent, in brief, we have maintained a section on this topic as the previous guidance had, but as most of the old guidance went into policy H11 of the London Plan, this is significantly pared back and now just reaffirms the affordable housing expectations for build to rent, the role of covenant, i.e. that affordable rent is secured for a minimum period of 15 years in single ownership, and that eligibility and affordability criteria for intermediate rent homes applies to the discount market rent offer on any build to rent schemes.
The guidance also sets out the approach for public land, and this is largely taken from the public land practice note. It confirms that we will continue to use the Public Sector Classifications Guide for determining when sites are to be treated as public land. It sets out the approach for different types of interest in the land and also for schemes which involve the delivery of wider public infrastructure. It also provides guidance on scenarios where sites are partly in public ownership and partly in private ownership, and also the approach for sites that have been acquired for redevelopment by public authorities. The LPG also sets out guidance for schemes that are required to follow the viability tested route under policies H4 and H5 of the London Plan, and that includes sites that are providing off-site contributions for affordable housing, schemes where other policy requirements are not being met to the satisfaction of the borough or the mayor as appropriate, schemes that involve the loss of existing affordable housing or for estate regeneration, schemes where applicants are relying on vacant building credit as means of reducing the level of affordable housing to be proposed, and developments that include purpose-built shared living. And finally, the guidance includes new sections on helping to secure affordable housing delivery by providing advice as to the approach that should be taken in Section 106 obligations, which include requirements to restrict occupation on market housing to ensure that affordable housing comes forward, guidance on the approach for outline applications, and also a requirement that affordable housing should be made available to registered providers on a freehold basis or 990-year leasehold wherever possible, and this follows the approach to shared ownership taken in the new government model. A new section is also included on monitoring and implementation in line with policy H7 of the London Plan, and this sets out requirements for applicants and for councils to provide information, and that information is provided to the GLA through the London Plan Data Hub and assists with monitoring the implementation of the plan.
On the Development Viability London Plan guidance, we wanted to start by setting out a few of its key overarching objectives. The first one being to explain processes and principles relating to viability assessment clearly to all stakeholders, including those whose role doesn't necessarily involve considering development viability on a daily basis. The guidance aims to ensure a robust viability assessment process that can be relied on by applicants, planning authorities and other stakeholders. London Plan Policy H5 describes that where a scheme doesn't follow the fast-track route, that it must follow the viability tested route. The document provides detailed guidance on the viability tested route. It's also important to note that, much like the Affordable Housing and Viability Supplementary Planning Guidance document, which has been in place since 2017, the new guidance has been drafted to accommodate the market cycle and on the basis that it will be in place for a number of years. The main content of the viability guidance is separated into the 4 sections stated on the screen: viability assessment process, principles for undertaking viability assessment, viability information inputs and sense check, and viability review mechanisms. In the following slides, we'll tell you a bit more about the content of each of these sections. Starting with the viability assessment process section, the guidance encourages engagement at pre-application stage so discussion on key inputs and principles can take place as early as possible. Our experience of this process is that it speeds up engagement at application stage and can help schemes reach decision more quickly. The viability assessment process section sets out that applicants need to demonstrate that particular circumstances justify the need for a viability assessment at application stage. This is in line with paragraph 58 of the National Planning Policy Framework and policy DF1 of the London Plan. Clear evidence of the specific issues that would prevent delivery should be provided, alongside a schedule of which viability inputs differ from the assumptions used when the local development plan was assessed for viability purposes. It will therefore be for the local planning authority and the GLA for applications referable to the Mayor to consider whether the information provided demonstrates that there are genuine barriers to delivering the proposed development and meeting relevant policy requirements. The guidance describes that it will be for the decision maker to determine the weight to be given to a viability assessment, including with reference to whether the local development plan and viability evidence underpinning it is up to date and the transparency of the evidence supporting the viability assessment. Again, this is in line with paragraph 58 of the NPPF policy DF1 of the London Plan. The guidance restates the Mayor's commitment on viability assessment being transparent and publicly available, with the default position being that information needs to be made publicly available unless there are statutory grounds to not do so. Since the adoption of the Affordable Housing and Viability SBG, we have seen the viability process moving to be more open and transparent, which is important from a public trust and scrutiny perspective. However, this remains an important issue and the drafting of the new guidance reflects this. The guidance advises that authorities should develop and enhance internal expertise in Section 106 agreements, affordable housing, viability and related matters. Having specialist officers and teams can speed up and improve the planning process and take pressure off development management case officers in terms of managing the viability assessment process and the process of agreeing Section 106s, and in particular, the securing of affordable housing and viability review mechanisms. These specialists can also advise on and help form development plan policies and lead on and coordinate area-wide viability testing to establish evidence for local plans, CIL charging schedules, master plans, and infrastructure funding studies.
I'm going to run through the principles for undertaking viability assessments. The key principle is that viability assessments should provide an objective and realistic valuation of the development site. The evidential burden is on the applicant, and FVA should be comprehensive with all inputs used in the assessment fully evidenced. It is important that assessors act in accordance with professional standards and in the public interest. They should be aware of all professional guidance, including guidance issued by the RICS, even if they are not members. All assessors should remember they have a duty of care to ensure that public confidence in the process is maintained. And finally, they need to ensure that FVAs result in a rational, reasonable and realistic conclusion with an overall viability judgment applied to the outcome of reports. The draft guidance stresses the importance of sensitivity and growth testing. It is important to remember that it will be up to the decision maker to determine the weight given to a viability assessment. Viability assessments are very sensitive to changes in inputs, so it is important that the decision makers are able to consider outcomes in a range of scenarios. Sensitivity testing should cover changes to a number of different inputs, where these have a significant impact on viability. Values and build costs as a minimum, but also developers' return and profit. For longer term schemes, it is also important to model growth and inflation. The draft guidance also emphasises the importance of the sense check, which is in line with RICS guidance. It is important to stand back and consider the residual land value output of an appraisal against land transactions. For example, can it really be correct that the scheme shows a negative land value with no affordable housing when the adjoining very similar site has recently sold for £5 million with consent for 35% affordable housing? Analysis of land transactions using information from FPAs in terms of floor areas and assumed development costs can be helpful in checking the outcome of an assessment and the inputs assumed. Viability inputs. The draft guidance sets out standards for information, evidence required in viability assessments. It includes advice on evidencing sales values, rents and yields. There is nothing prescriptive in terms of the assumptions, they just need to be evidence-based. Detailed elemental cost plans should be provided consistent with the level of detail in the planning application drawings. The draft guidance also explains that evidence needs to reflect the most appropriate approach to delivery and the typical developer. The assessor needs to consider how some costs will vary depending on the likely developer for that site and how it will be brought forward. This may include finance costs, purchaser's costs including stamp duty, and the minimum developer's return required to bring the site forward. Valuations of affordable housing need to be provided and supported by evidence. Market transactions, which is generally the acquisition of Section 106 units, should be used where available. If the affordable housing is valued using a cash flow approach, details should be provided on all inputs and the model used. Actual amounts of grant funding secured and the timing of payments need to be reflected in appraisals. It is particularly important that it is considered at application stage, as it not only increases income to the scheme but also reduces finance costs. Estimated grant should also be tested if there is a realistic chance of this being available. The guidance sets out some key principles in terms of the assessment of benchmark land value. The approach to benchmark land value in policy is intended to ensure that the landowner receives at least the existing use value, but that any additional value above that is justified by considering whether the site would have a higher value than existing use value for development on a fully policy compliant basis. This does not mean that land transactions should form the basis of benchmark land value, as this would reintroduce circularity in terms of higher prices paid for land, reducing policy compliance. Land transactions can be used to cross-check benchmark land value, but only where the scheme is policy compliant or the price paid adjusted accordingly. The draft guidance also provides some additional details on the approach. The primary approach remains existing use value. Detailed evidence is required to support valuations of existing buildings where they are to be demolished in order to justify that the value exceeds the cost of maintaining that income. Where an alternative use value is assumed, it needs to meet some key tests. The applicant will need to demonstrate that the alternative scheme would be supported by the LPA and stand a good chance of obtaining planning permission. There is demand for that use and it could be delivered. There is a requirement to provide detailed drawings and cost plans. A refurbishment will normally be considered an alternative use value. In respect of the premium, the updated guidance does not include prescriptive percentages, but is similar to the more comprehensive approach set out in the latest RACS guidance, which enables the decision maker to weigh up any premium required by the landowner to release the site against achieving policy compliance.
In relation to viability review mechanisms, we have found that the use of the formulas included in the Affordable Housing and Viability Supplementary Planning Guidance has helped to standardise and speed up the negotiation of Section 106 agreements. The new guidance proposes to retain this approach with some additions and updates. It also proposes to provide more flexibility in terms of allowing reviews that constitute a more comprehensive reappraisal of the scheme for larger schemes or ones seeking an outline permission. There may be less certainty at application stage of the costs of developing these schemes, so adopting an approach that can consider a wider array of inputs may be appropriate in some cases. For clarity, we have introduced a formula for mid-stage reviews in the guidance, which will help with drafting Section 106 agreements where these apply. These will be consistent with the formula for early-stage reviews for viability-tested schemes and will allow a split of any surplus profits only where a scheme, via an earlier review, has increased the proposed affordable housing provision up to at least the relevant threshold level. Clarity has also been provided in relation to when these reviews should take place. For example, for outline or hybrid schemes, it may be appropriate for these to take place as part of reserve matters applications to enable affordable housing to be included within the design of the relevant phase. The guidance doesn't propose separate review formulas for build-to-rent or residential investment schemes. Notes attached to the formulas describes how they should be adapted to account for applications that assume a build-to-rent approach. Notes have also been added to ensure formulas are adaptable to circumstances where the delivery model assumed for viability assessment purposes at application stage is different to the way the scheme is delivered. In particular, this can deal with circumstances where a scheme or part of a scheme is assumed to be delivered as build for sale at application stage and then delivered as build to rent. The guidance also sets out the GLA's preferred approach to accounting for deficits in viability review mechanisms, where it is accepted that a deficit exists. This approach involves preparing a break-even appraisal with relevant figures then being inserted into the Section 106 and used in the formulas. This approach lines up with prevailing practice. The guidance discourages the inclusion of clauses in Section 106 agreements which seek to delay the trigger date for an early stage review. Given the substantial need for affordable housing in London, it is important that early stage reviews are triggered where substantial implementation is not reached by the target date, so an assessment as to whether a scheme can deliver more affordable housing can take place.